welcome back to my channel. Let's take a look at what we're doing today.
So if, like me, you've been having a hard time with Wizard, you'll probably have been testing out a few different builds as well. So I've put this one together recently and it's basically like a freezy CC build. I like to call it Mr. Frosty. So this build works really nicely in PvP Battleground. Obviously there's still that issue with Tempests, but I don't know any skills that Wizard have that work against Tempests. I think everyone's having a hard time with them. So my friend GameZone here agreed to help me out with this video by letting me practice these skills on him for the sake of this video so you can see exactly how it works. So we have Arcane Wind, and with the Frost Field alone, that makes a really nice combination. Obviously my Starfire Shard also triggered there, so if you've got strong legendary gems, you'll find this build works really nicely for you. So pretty much with this build, we've got Scorch, we've got Teleport, we've got Arcane Wind, and we have Frost Field. Now, this is totally different to any builds that I normally use, and I'm not really one for CC builds. I much prefer damage builds, but this works nicely if you want to play support in Battleground, or if you have high resonance and really high secondary stats, you'll find this works really nice to get you that MVP spot after the Battleground match ends. So, like I said, this build is pretty straightforward. The only thing is it is a little bit risky, and I find I do die quite a lot with this compared to the more ranged beam builds that you can also use. But obviously I made a video for the fire build, so I thought it made sense to make a video for this icy build as well. So we're going to go ahead and test this out in Battleground, and I'll talk you through all the essences that we're using. As always, if you see your name listed here for the battle, please drop me a comment and say hi. Unfortunately, I was against one of my clan mates for this today, so I was against my friend Warpet from clan, and I'm always disappointed to see when I'm against players that I know rather than being on the same team as them, because I'm always matched with people that I don't know, and then the people that I do know, I'm always having to kill an attack, so that really sucks when I see that in Battleground. But starting off, we're going to look at set items. So we're using 4 pieces of prayer for End Winter. So your damage is increased by 15% when attacking chilled enemies and 30% when attacking frozen enemies. Bosses immune to chill and freeze effects will become marked, triggering these bonuses. With this, as I said, we've got 4 pieces. So you also have 30% chance to freeze already chilled enemies for 3 seconds when applying an additional chill on them. Cannot freeze the same target more often than once every 10 seconds. Now, you could use 6 pieces of this in Battleground, because with that, dealing damage to chilled enemies grants you Mountain's Breath for 12 seconds, causing your attacks to shatter chilled or frozen enemies. Chilled enemies take 16,908 damage, and frozen enemies take 30,999 damage when shattered. Cannot trigger Mountain's Breath more than once every 40 seconds, and each enemy cannot be shattered more than once every 0.5 seconds. So basically that shattering effect, it looks like it hits more than once. So that is really strong in this set, so if you can get 6 pieces of it, I would definitely recommend that. Unfortunately, I've had a really hard time with farming greens. Obviously not being able to pre-farm for Inferno 1 was just really shit, to be honest. Normally I pre-farm from like 50 Paragon levels before the next Paragon level, so we weren't able to do that, unfortunately. And I'm going to be focusing soon on farming for Inferno 2. But I'd recommend using, depending on what legendary gems you're using, you could always go with 4 pieces of Grace, 4 pieces of End Winter, or you could go with 6 pieces of End Winter and 2 pieces of Grace, or you could go with Vitu's Shalbas if you have a strong primary attack, or if you have skills stacked, or essences, sorry, stacked on primary. 4 pieces of Shalbas works really nicely as well, but definitely go for End Winter for at least 2 pieces of this build. As I said, I would prefer to have had 6 pieces of it, just to give me that extra buff. But overall, that set is the one that I would definitely recommend for this build, and you can easily just play around with the others and find which one works for you. Now just top line going over the legendary gems that I'm using in this build. So I have the ones that I always use in PvP. So starting off, we've got Bloodsoaked Jade, Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Viper's Bite, Mother's Lament, Gloom Cask, and Bottled Hope. Now, you could use these gems. I recommend going with the ones that have the damage over time, so you could go with Viper's Bite and Seeping Bile, or one or the other. They work really nicely with any of the PvP builds. For me, having the Starfire Shard is a must in Battleground, because the amount of times it's triggered on enemies that are far away from me and got me that kill is just so good. And then anything that stacks into primary. So the reason I use Gloom Cask is because although I don't necessarily use my primary a lot, it quite often does trigger when I do need to use it. So that's really helpful, just to have that extra damage coming from Gloom Cask there. So those are the gems that I'm using in this build. Like I said, I'd recommend just going for ones that are damage over time. So anything that will help you get more damage like I have right now. You can see I've got a poison effect on me there, and they do take your life quite quickly. So I'd recommend going with something like one of those gems, definitely. So Sleeping Bowl or Viper's Bite is a must for me in Battleground. So a few different legendary gems you could use in this build that would also work nicely and also are really strong in PvP. There's Grim Rhythm, which is a 2-star gem. Now the only downside to this is that it's hard to find because you can only get it from Boon of Plenty and Battle Pass. But Grim Rhythm increases your primary attack speed, and it's a gem that I definitely want to use because I feel that Wizard's attack speed is kind of lacking. And I have the attack speed buff on every single piece of legendary gear. I've reforged all of my gear to have the increased attack speed, and Wizard to me is still really slow, especially when you face demon hunters. I would rather have that kind of attack speed. So Grim Rhythm is a must. If you can use that gem in Battleground, I would definitely recommend going with that. There's also Storm Vault, Void Spark, and More of the Deep that work really nicely in PvP. So those are alternatives to the gems that I'm using in this setup. So you can see this is going to be a win for our team, and I definitely feel that although this build is quite strong, it's more of a support build. It doesn't necessarily give the most damage like some of the other builds have. Obviously my highest damage build just doesn't really work anymore because of Tempest, but this one is good with the CC, and you can see there we were actually ranked 3rd for the match on our team, so 3rd for kills, and also we did well on the assists there too and didn't die too much, so that's a bit of a bonus. So we're now going to take a look at the legendary gear and essences that we're using for this build. As always, starting with the helm, we're using Vaishya's Resourceful Countenance. So this creates Electric Orb. Scorch now launches an electric orb that explodes on impact, creating an electric field that pursues enemies and inflicts them with shock. Scorch damage is increased by 18%, and the cooldown is decreased 10% because I've got an Awakened slot. Now all of my slots on my gear are Awakened now as well. So we've got these bonuses for different things on every single gear piece. On the chest, we're using Lysana's Sorrow, so this gives Creeping Chill. Frostfield now grants you with Creeping Chill, causing your attacks to chill enemies and freeze them on critical hits. Frostfield cooldown is reduced 7.2% and reduced 10% by the Awakened slot there as well. Keeping things simple on the shoulder, we're going in with Phoenix Mantle, so this increases the Scorch radius by 29% and damage is also increased 10%. On the pants, we are using Frostbond, so Frostfield now also shatters enemy armor, increasing the damage they take by 19% for 5 seconds, and Frostfield cooldown is reduced 10% from the Awakened slot, and that cooldown reduction, you do really notice it in Battleground, and it is really useful to have as much as possible. We've got Ice Spike on the main hand, so every 5 seconds the next magic missile becomes Frost Missile, dealing 53,889 damage to all nearby enemies. Damage is increased by 90%, and the damage is increased 10% from the Awakened slot there as well, so that works beautifully in this build, and obviously it's another frost-based essence as well. We've got Unrepentant Gale on the offhand. Maximum Arcane Wind charges are increased by 1, and Arcane Wind cooldown reduced by 3.6%. Arcane Wind damage increased 10% there from the Awakened slot. Again, works really nicely having that extra charge. We've got Bluster Crux on the alternate main hand. Arcane Wind now conjures a wind core at a target location that continually damages and pulls nearby enemies to its centre. Arcane Wind damage is increased 18% and the cooldown is decreased 10%. So we've got 2 charges of that and that cooldown reduction, so you can pretty much launch that one after the other. And lastly, we're using Alder Crystal, so Arcane Wind now also freezes chilled enemies for 2.4 seconds, cannot occur more often than once every 3 seconds or 5 seconds for players, and Arcane Wind damage is increased by 10%. So that's what I've used for this. If you can make any recommendations on how to make this build stronger, let me know in the comments. I'd be really interested to try out some different things. I've kind of been playing with this on and off for the last couple of weeks, trying to come up with a build other than the burn one. Personally, I feel that I've had better results with the Disintegrate and the Ice Crystal build that I used in my last PvP video, but I know it's nice to try different things out, so I wanted to give this a go. But like I said, if you can make any recommendations on how to improve this build, let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.